If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka.
And we are here for our requisite mid-break, well, not really mid-break, early break emails episode / season 4 planning.
Yeah, so we're going to go through the emails that you sent us. There have been some other messages. I think I have one message from Twitter. I will say, just to keep things organized, if you send me something via email, I will read it. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through the emails that you sent us throughout the season. We're also going to be having somewhat of a pseudo production meeting to see if this movie that you suggested is worth it. And then later on, we're going to see if that actually gets turned into an episode. Because like I've mentioned before, all the movies that we consider, that we go through, I want to make sure that there is an interesting story behind it and not just some clickbait article that I see on Screen Rant that says that Guillermo del Toro thought about making a movie 10 years ago and then they decided not to make it.
If you've listened to these episodes before, you know, we go through kind of our list of like, okay, what do we want to talk about next season? And there have been times where we hear a suggestion from an email on Mike and we're like, oh, that sounds really cool. And then we look into it and maybe there wasn't as much to it. And sometimes we're able to like, you know, combine that with something else for a two-parter. But at the same time, we always hear some really amazing suggestions. There's always some really cool stuff that we would not have considered if it hadn't been for people reaching out to us and say, hey, why don't you talk about this?
Yeah. Now, that also keeps in mind that we will take everything into consideration, but we won't take everything to make into an episode. From what I'm reading right now, we have over 30 unread emails. And if you know, our season is only 12 episodes long. So
plus there's things that Dan and I want to talk about.
Yeah, there is. And we are also kind of falling into a format-ish kind of where I'm realizing we have to start big, like with the superhero, and then we oftentimes like to end it with a superhero. That's how I like to do it, is start big, and then you have like one for the audience, or a few for the audience, like when we did the Red Dwarf movie.
Oh, yes, yes.
But then we also do some for ourselves, like when we did the George Romero musical. Like that was something that I thought was really interesting, and I thought we had to go into.
I still think about the guy in was it Australia or something, who said that he had a whole bunch of money that he didn't have.
Yeah. Another thing that we often do is shows that go from the UK and then come over to the States and fail miserably, although we are seeing some instances now where that's actually become a more of a success than a failure. I think on our most recent Unclogged episode, I talked about Ghosts.
Yeah.
And that transfer of that TV show from the UK to the US and how successful that's been and how great of a show that is.
Yeah. And I think one more thing we'll say about the emails is that, you know, we always kind of come in cold. I don't read anything about these. Dan kind of skims through subject lines just to get ready. And the fact that we have more emails than ever is pretty awesome. But we'll see what things you have to say.
So let's dive into it. The first one that I actually want to go into is actually not a suggestion, but a correction. This actually comes from Instagram. It was one of our listeners, Matthew Hurdle. He actually came to us and said that Gateway City, the Gateway City that was mentioned in our Wonder Woman episode, is actually canon in the DC Comics universe, or at least in Wonder Woman's universe. And he actually sent me a link to the DC fandom wiki page for that. And I am surprised that I missed it. I mean, I did research a lot for it, but I guess I just didn't go that far into it. But sure, yeah.
Yeah, good to know. Thank you for sending that. We always appreciate anything to fact check and make sure our info is correct.
Yes. Before we get into the emails, there was a suggestion that I got from Twitter that I screenshotted just to make sure that we don't miss it. This one is from @Fizz versus the World. He says, since they've already broken the seal with their PT episode, when How Did This Not Get Made gets around to season 4, I'd love to see them tackle the long history of canceled Resident Evil games. For example, 1.5, the prior builds of Resident Evil 4, and how they became a whole new franchise.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know much about Resident Evil, but I know one thing that, on the video game subject, there's 2 stories I would love to get into that I think we've talked about in the past. There's Star Wars 1313, and then there's some canceled Zelda projects, specifically what was going to be on the GameCube before they made Wind Waker. But Resident Evil.
I was talking with Gage because Gage and I, we recently did an episode of Almost Adults. While we were talking off mic, he brought up a Metroid game that wasn't made as well, and the interesting story behind that. So that might be something that we will have to get into as well.
Metroid, that's one of those series that I do not know much about, except that Brie Larson really, really wants to play Samus.
I just remember the big, I don't know if it was a controversy, but it was like this big splash when it was revealed that Metro was a woman.
Samus was a woman.
Samus was a woman.
Metroid is the little aliens in there. They're like little squid things with teeth.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into the emails.
Yeah.
And the first one we have from Diego Lacamara.
Yeah, that's one of our patrons.
So he says, hello, suggestions for How Did This Not Get Made are... I love that he put the question mark at the end of it.
Is that an official part of the title? Do we always have to include that?
I guess. It is in our logo.
Never really thought much about that.
Yeah.
I still haven't decided if pipe dream is 1 word or 2 words.
I can't figure that out either. On our website, it's 1 word.
Okay. That's what matters. You just got to remember to be consistent. Anyways, Diego's suggestions.
Nemona and Mouse Guard.
Oh, it's something that we've had on our list in the past. Mouse Guard, though, makes me think of Redwall. Yeah, we might have talked about this previously, because I'm looking at it right now, and this does seem like something worth talking about.
Okay.
They had a full cast list. I see Andy Serkis there. It looks like Mouse Guard was based on an RPG, I think. I'm just looking at this now, just like going off of here. They had a demo reel for stuff. Oh, you can see clips of like final animation or close to finalized animation.
Oh.
This could have been really cool.
All right. So that might fulfill our animation.
Oh, yeah. But this is like animation in the same way that like Gowls of Ga'Hoole or whatever. Is that Guardians? I don't know.
I don't remember.
But I mean, it's like that kind of level of, this is animated woodland creatures, but we're going to try to look cool and epic.
Okay, so that might fulfill our animation.
Yeah.
So I'll have to look into that.
Oh, Gary Whitta was attached to this. Matt Reeves was attached to this.
I know.
Oh, there's some interesting people behind this. This definitely looks like it could be a really good story.
And with Matt Reeves coming out with the new Batman movie.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting to line up there. Next, we have an email from Daniel Feehan. Hey, how did this not get made? I found your podcast listening to EFVD, or Escape from Walt Disney, and I love it, especially your Jurassic Park 4 episode.
Oh.
I'm going to suggest another franchise close to my heart. Would you be interested in talking about some unmade Godzilla movies?
Ooh.
Okay. I doubt you could cover them all in an episode on John DeBunt's unmade 1993-94 Godzilla movie and the never-made Godzilla 1998 sequel written by Tab Murphy, who wrote Atlantis: The Lost Empire. That would be a fascinating episode. Godzilla has a long history, so that alone could be an episode. The Tab script is online to read, and he even talked about it recently.
Ooh, that's awesome.
Cool. Yeah, so Godzilla is definitely something I'd be interested in.
I've got somebody in mind that would be great as a guest for that as well.
Ooh.
I don't think she still does a Godzilla podcast, but at one point did a Godzilla podcast.
Okay, we could probably get them on. I was obsessed with the Roland Emmerich Godzilla. Now, I was also like 10 years old when that movie came out, and I had it on VHS. So going into the history of Godzilla, I mean, not just the American version, obviously, the history of it through Japan. And I know the origin story of the history of Godzilla is definitely interesting to go into, in the metaphor of it being the nuclear bomb and the aftermath of that.
Yeah. Side note, for anybody else sending in emails for future suggestions, linking us to video, here's the full script online. That definitely helps makes Dan's life easier on seeing if there's enough info out there.
Oh, so much.
Not asking you to, do all the research for us or anything, but just letting us know, hey, there is multiple things out there that make a story.
Yeah. So the next one we have from Noble Crisp says, "Hello there. I've been listening to the show since its initial launch, though I did fall behind a little in late 2020 because life just gets in the way sometimes. Mm-hmm. However, I've picked the show back up, and lately I'm enjoying it just as much as I have before. I love the concept, and you guys do a fascinating job at realizing said concept, so I just wanted to get that out there. For suggestions, I had originally thought of the failed and canceled American adaptation of the Australian TV series Rake, which also had some involvement with none other than Sam Raimi." Okay. Well, I think that might be interesting. I've also been getting into the music of Ron and Russell Mael, a.k.a. Sparks.
Sparks, Nevada? Oh, no. Sorry.
Sparks, as in, the Sparks.
Yes.
Okay.
The band, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's your favorite band's favorite band.
Yes. Edgar Wright just did that documentary, right?
Yep. Have you watched it?
I have not. I've heard good things.
Oh, it's so good. It's really good. It's on Netflix.
Oh, is it?
Like, you have no excuse.
I mean, I did finally watch, because it just got added to Netflix, Paddington.
Yeah.
And Paddington 2 is on HBO, so that's next.
Paddington 2 is wonderful. I don't think it's the highest scoring movie on Rotten Tomatoes anymore.
Yeah, I think somebody
it
found
down,
a bad review of it or something.
And someone found that critic, and they're like, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And I'm sure he's sitting there in the corner. He's like, "I didn't think it was that good." Anyway, so he's been fascinated by some of the weird side stories you hear in reading about their albums. The two aborted projects I find most interesting are, firstly, the 1980s failed pilot for the TV series based on the Modestly Blaze comic strip, which they composed the theme song for, and which they would later re-record for one of their albums. However, there's also their attempt at making a live-action film based on a manga called Mai, the Psychic Girl. They attempted work on this in a 6-year gap from the music industry that they took between their 1988 album Interior Design and their 1994 album Gratuitous Sax and Senseless Violins. What little I've heard of both these projects sound fascinating, and with the brothers finally releasing a film in the form of the musical Annette later this year, I couldn't help but thinking that a How Did This Not Get Made episode on either of these would be a fun time. Sorry if this was super rambling. Even if none of these suggestions take your fancy, I still love the show, and I'm excited to see what the future holds. Keep up the great work. Kind regards, Dale's Ramblings.
I totally forgot that Annette, that movie, had music done by Sparks. Did you see Annette? I never saw it, but I know people talked about it.
I didn't see it. Although, diving into the story of the Sparks, I think is really interesting. I know we talked briefly about the Sparks when we did an episode for the Weird Alphabet.
It was Virus Alert, right?
I think so. The Sparks are a really interesting band. I know that they did a lot of music for movies, TV shows. That TV pilot I'll have to look into to see if there's much of a story behind it. Although the live action film that they took a 6-year break on, I think might have a much better story, especially if it's taking half a decade out of their lives to try and put together.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into that.
By the way, if you Google Weird Al Sparks style parody, the third result is the Weird Alphabet podcast.
Hey! Although that might be catered specifically for you.
Oh, no! Now I gotta do another search in an incognito window. Yep, still number 3 in incognito.
All right. So next we have an email from Gordon Rajani. So he says, I've been listening to your podcast, and it's been really fun hearing about the films that never got made. Keep up the great work. Also, I don't know if there's enough for a full-length episode since it never went beyond the script phrase, but I'd love to hear you guys talk about Richard Kelly's, of Donnie Darko fame, proposed adaptation of Disney's 2003 Holes. And you can find the script right here. Hey.
Whoa. That's kind of an interesting combo.
Yeah.
That's really strange to think about because this isn't a controversial opinion, but it's just not one that's spoken much about. Holes is one of the best film adaptations of a children's book that's been made.
Really?
Have you never seen Holes?
I have read the book.
The movie is really solid. It's like not the greatest movie ever made, but it's like they do a really good job. I don't know. It's just like just a good movie.
Because I always make the argument that Hunger Games is definitely one of the better book adaptations, and the best book adaptation out there is Fight Club.
Is the best book film adaptation the one that's better than the book?
Yeah. Chuck Palahniuk even came out and was quoted saying, like, the movie's better than my book.
Yeah. It could just be like nostalgia glasses for Holes because I don't think I've seen it since I was a kid when it first came out. But I feel like it's one of those movies that I see referenced every now and then, and it's always like people being like, remember Holes, you guys? That was a really good movie. It's got Dule Hill in it. I mean, of course, it's starring Shia LaBeouf before he was,
a real-life cannibal.
Shia LaBeouf, yeah. It's got Sigourney Weaver as the villain.
Oh.
I'm just going to go through this whole cast list now because it's great. Tim Blake Nelson is in it. Oh my goodness, Henry Winkler was in it? I totally forgot about that.
I will have to check that out.
Patricia Arquette, that's who I was trying to think of. I was like, what's her name? Patricia Arquette's in it. It's a pretty good movie. It's worth watching.
All right, I'll have to take a rewatch on that because I remember really loving the book. There might have been just some resentment to me watching the movie to be like, why would you? I think it was around that time that anything that was being adapted from a book to a movie was just not
for sure
going to be good or just being disappointed. And I think I just came at it that way and was like, it's probably not going to be good at all. So I just didn't bother. But I remember really loving the book.
Oh, yeah. It's got a 78 on Rotten Tomatoes, which for a kids movie made in 2003, that's like 95%.
All right. So next we have an email from Julia Stevens. She says, hey guys, I'm the type of person who is fascinated by history and behind the scenes details of multiple things that humans have created, including movies, which is how I found your show. A while ago, I saw a video review of the Pauly Shore Steve Baldwin vehicle Biodome.
Mm-hmm. That was the only in-flight movie on the way to Albuquerque.
The reviewer put in the detail that it was originally going to be the third Bill and Ted movie before it was rewritten at the last minute. I figured that had to be an interesting story behind this. I was about to request that you guys do an episode about this until I found out that it was just an urban legend.
Oh. If it was truly written to be a Bill and Ted 3, then that means like not only did we get the Biodome, but we also got Bill and Ted 3.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like the urban legend that I know we talked about on here, that parts of Who Framed Roger Rabbit came from a Chinatown sequel that was canceled.
And we debunked that. We are here for debunking all of that.
Yep.
She goes on saying, however, I did read about how Don Bluth was going to do a movie called Strawberry Fields Forever, which not only would have been Fantasia with Beatles, but it would have been the first CGI movie ever.
Whoa.
Okay. If there's enough information about this, this could make a good episode. Can't wait for future episodes. Julia.
There's already a bunch of elements in there that definitely have me. I've never heard of this before. That's cool.
Because I know we went through the history of Pixar, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
So I think going through, and I'll have to look into Strawberry Fields Forever.
Wow. Don Bluth plus Beatles plus potentially the first CG animated movie. That's really cool.
Next, we have an email from my brother, Joe Kaka.
Dan, you have a brother?
Yes, I have a brother.
I've known you for so long, and I never knew you had any siblings.
I am the oldest of 3. One brother, one sister below me. Yep. So my brother Joe says, Jay and Silent Bob go to Canada, eh? He says, Brittany and I saw it on Degrassi. They saw it on Degrassi. So then is that real?
I don't know if we've talked about this on here. I feel like we had a conversation about Kevin Smith. It was when we did the Jaws episode, because we talked about Moose Jaws.
Yeah.
Because he's got a bunch of unmade projects that like all kind of circle through different various forms and kind of all blend together. So there's the Canada trilogy that I don't think was ever finished, that was supposed to end with Moose Jaws, that started with Tusk.
Yes, I remember that.
Which I've seen Tusk. I haven't seen, what's the second one? Yoga Hosers, I think?
Yes.
And I also know there was supposed to be Clerks 3, which was supposed to be the return of Jay and Silent Bob. Clerks 3 didn't get made, and he made the Jay and Silent Bob reboot, I think is what it was called.
That had a limited release, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jay and Silent Bob reboot. A lot of it is that he just wanted to put a lot of control into the movie and just didn't want to deal with, like, the big studio system.
Oh, yeah. I mean, after the whole Red State thing.
Yeah.
I've never heard, though, Jay and Silent Bob Go to Canada or whatever that title was, which honestly sounds like a title that Kevin Smith could have been talking about at one point in time. Mm-hmm. I definitely think there could be enough there to just do a whole Kevin Smith episode on just all of the things that he never made. The thing with Kevin Smith, though, that I feel it's like good and bad, because it's like with his millions of podcasts, he is just like constantly throwing out movie ideas. I feel like you can never be too sure whenever Kevin Smith says he's going to make something, how much of it is a thing that he actually is trying to get made, or the millions of podcast ideas that I just throw at you and Michael every now and then to be like, oh, we should do a podcast about this. And I have no time or energy put into it other than like maybe coming up with a name.
But I mean, if we kind of compile those all into one movie and kind of go into the realization of Tusk and then how that goes into there. But
also Kevin Smith's kind of career trajectory, especially from Red State and after, is like really bizarre. And when you include things like Cop Out, he's got a really strange career that could definitely make for an interesting episode.
Yeah, and we've definitely touched on his career when we did the Superman episode.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't really get to meet him, but I did get to see him do his podcast live at Scum and Villainy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's actually where I got him to sign my Superman Lives poster.
Nice.
But yeah, going into the history of Kevin Smith, because he's definitely one of those early 90s era independent filmmakers who got like adopted by like the big movie system. Mm-hmm. Kind of the same era of when we got like Robert Rodriguez or Quentin Tarantino.
Steven Soderbergh.
Yeah, and he's kind of in that area there. So I think it'll be interesting to go into what he's done and see what
there could definitely be an interesting story there.
Yeah.
I used to be a massive Kevin Smith fan, and like a lot of his movies don't hold up for me as well as they used to. But I still have a lot of nostalgia for Clerks and Chasing Amy and Dogma especially. I don't know if you've ever seen Dogma, but I love that
I had
movie.
the special edition Dogma.
That's another movie I haven't seen in a while, and I'm kind of afraid to go back to because I have so many fond memories that I don't want it to be tarnished, but I feel like that's a really good movie.
So I'll look into that. Next we have... So this email is I'm just going to say it's from Jane Tony, 1999. Oh, I see. The emailer is called Because I'm Bored. That's not the subject. That's actually what they wrote down is like, this is their name, Because I'm Bored. Jane Tony, 1999. Okay, so they say, I saw your podcast and thought you could do an episode on Forrest Gump 2. There was a sequel book that was originally meant to tie in to the movie called Shrimp & Co. It got canned due to 9/11 happening, but allegedly involved O.J. Simpson and Princess Diana. The movie sounds bonkers, and I'd love to see you cover it. I feel like I've heard about that.
I feel like I've heard about this too.
And Forrest Gump is one of those movies, much like Gladiator, as much as Ridley Scott is trying to make the sequel.
I was about to say, twist, Forrest Gump 2 is actually Gladiator 2.
But I feel like Forrest Gump is one of those movies that just kind of stays within itself. There's not really much you can go beyond that or like go into a sequel of, other than like...
Yeah.
This guy also had a bunch of other crazy adventures, or just like stumbled upon much more crazy adventures after meeting his son, and maybe him and his son go on crazy adventures. But this just kind of seems like it kind of starts to fall into like Mr. Magoo type categories of like he's just casually going through historical events of the US and is just getting away unscathed.
Yeah.
And I imagine that if O.J. Simpson, even if it's not the O.J. Simpson, if O.J. Simpson and Princess Diana are involved, I feel like...
Oh, you know O.J. Simpson would be playing himself, like, in that movie. Yeah. Like, that's the exact type of thing that he would do. I mean, you've heard about his prank show, right?
I do. Oh, it was awful. I think the peak of it in, like, the sketch that they did just before it got canceled or canned was when he was trying to sell on a used car lot a Ford Bronco.
Yep.
And we're like, no, this is... You are basically exploiting probably like not only a terrible part of like judicial history, but also that was his lowest moment. And for them to kind of like cash in on that is just so exploitative. And it just, it's sickening.
Yeah.
Also from Because I'm Bored, they say, please cover the original script for Twilight when Paramount had the rights. It's got night goggles, vampire hunters, and a jet ski chase. Okay.
Definitely sounds like, one of those Hollywood adaptations where somebody reads a synopsis and is like, let's just do something entirely different.
Yeah, just like the Spider-Man horror movie.
Yep.
Next, we have an email from Matthew Horvath. It says, hello again, you two. I know I emailed you a few weeks ago, but I got a few animated topics for the podcast. By the way, I've been listening even more episodes, and it's really interesting hearing all the different stories and people all throughout the film industry. Anyway, here's the animated films and 2 shows that you might be interested in. There's The Legend of Tembo, a CGI animated elephant-centric film that was made by former Disney artists Aaron Blaise and Chuck Williams. It was done by an independent studio, and while producing it, it went bankrupt. So Blaise has a good social media presence, so you can contact him and have him on the podcast. I mean, we could try. Also, lots of animatics and concept art has been released, so there's a lot to find. Okay, so that's always a good thing.
Awesome.
The next is related to the DreamWorks and Netflix show from last year, Kippo and the Age of the Wonder Beasts. While the show ended last year with 3 seasons, which is pretty typical for Netflix, the creators are developing some post-finale films of some of these shows' characters, but Netflix didn't greenlight any of them. But the creators, they aren't giving up on them being made one day. One of the creators, Radford Sincreis, has written and is now storyboarding the character Wolf. Here's his Twitter. Okay, so I'll check that out. There's the 3 seasons of the Nickelodeon Netflix show Glitch Tex, which is also very close to being done, and Nickelodeon didn't finalize the production of it. Lots of people love that show and want to see the 3rd season complete, especially since it's almost finished. Okay, so Glitch Tex. There are the many DreamWorks animated films not made. The ones that would be a good individual podcast would be Me and My Shadow, Monkeys of Mumbai, Boo, B-O-O, which sounds familiar.
Yeah, that's on our list from a previous thing, the Bureau of Otherworldly Operations.
Right, that's what it is. Okay, so Me and My Shadow, Monkeys of Mumbai, B-O-O, and Larkins. And finally, the now seemingly defunct Hasbro franchise, Hanazuki Full of Treasures. It has an interesting history before being acquired by Hasbro and has a very good YouTube series, but then seemed to go off into absurdity when it was put on Discovery Family. Among the unmade aspects of it included a season 2 cut short, several shorts not often released in the US, and many more lost media. An unproduced season 3, and even a feature film that was in development. So I think there's a lot of areas that can be explored, and maybe create enough attention that Hasbro sees their mistakes and get the line back up and running. Thanks, Matt Horvath.
Yeah, definitely a lot of suggestions in there. I definitely want to come back to Bureau of Otherworldly Operations, because if I remember, that was there was something about Bill Murray being in that. There was some other stuff I remember seeing about that was interesting. Maybe you looked into it, Dan, and didn't find enough of a story.
No, I remember that interested me. I don't think I actually looked into it. I remember going into A Few Good Ghosts and remember that covering animation. Maybe we should do some more animation, because there's a lot of stuff that's in there.
Oh yeah, I mean, already there's a couple of things that we've talked about today that I'm like, oh, this would be good. Yeah, thank you for all those suggestions. That is awesome. You can make an entire season out of just those suggestions.
Yeah. Next, we have an email from Ellie Odom. It says, "Hi all, my name's Ellie, big fan of the show. What with Denis Villeneuve's Dune being out and a longtime fan of the book myself, I was baffled the other day to learn that Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, which would have been the first adaptation and even predated Star Wars. After seeing it would have been Orson Welles as the Baron, Mick Jagger as Feud, and Salvador Dali as the Emperor, as well as music by Pink Floyd and designs by H.R. Giger. I figured I had to shoot you guys an email, and hopefully some others have. And I would love to hear an episode on it." Okay.
Dan, do you not know about Jodorowsky's Dune?
No, I do not.
This is like a really, really famous unmade movie, and I'm kind of surprised that I never thought about it or brought it up, but there was actually a documentary that came out. There's a ton of interesting stuff behind it, and the director was extremely passionate about it. I don't remember if it was Jodorowsky's Dune or a different version of Dune, that there was like I think it was Jodorowsky's Dune, where somebody sold the art book, but like sold it through as an NFT or something. And so a bunch of people raised like basically $1 million to win this auction to get it, thinking that would get them the rights to be able to make this thing. And then, of course, that's not how this works, because crypto rarely works the way that people who buy into it think it works.
NFTs are today's Beanie Babies, so...
Yeah, so there is a ton of passion behind that story. That's the kind of season opener or season closer thing. That's like Superman Lives level of like legends behind this movie.
Yeah. Looking into this, I remember I didn't actually read the chapter on this, but I have the book, The Greatest Sci-Fi Movies Never Made, a book by David Hughes, and he actually talks about Dune in there. So I think I'll have to go through that. I'll read the chapter, go through all that, because I think that'll be really interesting.
Oh, man. It was $3 million. This crypto group spent $3 million on this Dune concept art book.
Definitely want to do that. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
It feels like it's on the same level as the Beatles doing Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah. It's one of those movies that would have been a massive, like, cultural moment if it came out. If it was able to happen, it would be one of those legendary genre films that we would be talking about today, you know?
Yeah. Next, we have a email from Canceled Movie Report.
Hey!
And we've talked about them before. We've definitely praised a lot of their episodes because they do a really great job as to like recreating. We're kind of in the same boat. Yeah. We lean heavily towards the history of it, and they lean more heavily into the production value of creating these scripts.
They read through the scripts and add through, you know, performances and music and sound effects, and it's
really well done. But they said, "Hey lads, I just listened to your latest episode all about Red Dwarf, the movie, and I loved it. This project has been a white whale for me, as someone who grew up watching Red Dwarf on repeat and owning the tie-in Red Dwarf books, and even the audiobook versions of those, because I love Chris Berry's performance so much. I must say, you guys pulled out some info I'd never heard before. It was super interesting. I really do hope the screenplay leaks one day."
Yeah.
I actually have so little faith the movie would have been any good. Ever since Grant and Naylor split, the show has been on a downward trajectory, and Doug Naylor's weird obsession with getting the movie made with such a huge budget and seemingly massive scope really seems to fly in the face of the low-budget kitsch charm of the show that relied on really interesting sci-fi ideas. Yeah, I do agree with that. That's kind of like the draw of Doctor Who as well,
yeah.
is that we expect it to be low budget, and that's kind of the charm behind it. So I get that.
Yeah.
The movie did end up getting made in 2020, and it was so awful, it was almost painful to watch. Anyways, I just wanted to say, keep up the good work. This is from Cambo.
Thank you so much for writing in. I appreciate hearing from you. Dan, we got to get them on the podcast as guests.
Yeah.
That needs to happen.
So we have another email from Matthew Horvath. He says, whoops, got even more. The darker first drafts of Zootopia.
Okay.
Interesting. The infamous original version of Emperor's New Groove, Kingdom of the Sun.
Yes.
This is a big story. I've heard of this even before this podcast. I knew about the original version of Emperor's New Groove, so that might be interesting to go into. The proposed films that would turn into Home on the Range, including a Western ghost story. And then, since you mentioned it, the original and better sounding story treatments of the CGI Chicken Little from Disney. Wait, so I didn't realize that there were different treatments for it. I just thought that they just came out with the story for Chicken Little and was like, whoop, that's it. That's what we're doing. We're not doing A Few Good Ghosts.
Oh, man. I was on Tony's podcast talking about Chicken Little. That was
There's the director's cut of Blue Sky's Robots that had a lot of interesting scenes that got cut. While at Blue Sky Studios, their nearly completed and almost last film, Nimona.
Yeah, that was mentioned earlier along with Mouse Guard.
Lots of outrage from Disney canceling that one.
Yeah, I was just looking into it, and it looks like Nimona and Mouse Guard were both kind of based off of interesting properties. Nimona is based off of a graphic novel series, Mouse Guard based off of this RPG, and both of them were under Fox and got canceled with the Disney buyout.
Oh.
So, like, there could be a whole episode just about, like, those two projects.
Okay, I'll look into that. Only since it's my favorite, the original version of The Lion King, King of the Jungle, the recent and unfairly canceled Cartoon Network Infinity Train, where you can talk about the unmade seasons, aka books, the movie lengthened book 5 and Christmas special, Disney's Enchanted spin-off films that turned into Tangled. I was not aware of that. The scrapped Skylanders movie, the origins of the whole Crazy Game series. There's Tale of Sands, Jim Hennon's, and Jerry Jules' sci-fi screenplay that turned into a graphic novel. The several scrapped ideas in revivals of Fantasia. Fantasia is a really interesting one because it was one of those movies that Walt Disney pushed and had such passion for, even though it just failed constantly in theaters. He was constantly pushing for Fantasia. And even so, putting it into the parks where even now, the wizard Mickey is one of the most recognized Mickey costumes that are out there, even though Fantasia was a dud.
Yeah.
So I think that will be interesting to look into. The movie that was being developed was based on the preschool show, The Big Comfy Couch. Oh, I didn't realize The Big Comfy Couch was going to make a movie. The unrealized deal that Sony Animation and Fred Rader Studios had Go cartoons, where there would be the usual shorts of Fred Rader is famous for, which eventually some would be made into a TV show and then into a movie. So Go is the cartoon. Okay, I see. The first project developed by Sergio Pablo's The Spaz Studios, Giacomo's Secret. And finally, it's about Illumination's poor adaptation of The Lorax, which was originally going to be a crazy rock opera. Okay. Along with the other scrapped Dr. Seuss adaptations, including the studio trying to make a Dr. Seuss biopic with animation from the books, and Johnny Depp as Dr. Seuss.
Whoa. That sounds really interesting.
What is Dr. Seuss? I don't know what Dr. Seuss actually looks like, now that I think about it. I mean, unless they put prosthetics on him, he really doesn't look at all like Dr. Seuss. He kind of, In his younger years, he kind of goes through like a Mr. Rogers type phase. And then growing older, he kind of morphs into George A. Romero.
I'm looking at one picture of him, and he's reminding me a lot of, oh man, what's his name? Guy from Schitt's Creek and all the Christopher Guest movies with the big eyebrows.
Dan Levy?
Not Dan Levy. His dad.
Eugene Levy.
Eugene Levy. That's who I'm seeing when I look at this guy.
I can see that. Maybe Dan Levy plays young Dr. Seuss. Eugene Levy plays old Dr. Seuss.
Oh.
There's your movie right there.
Dan Levy is playing the raunchy political cartoon era of Dr. Seuss.
Next, we have an email from Shane Myers. Hello, big fan of the podcast. I was wondering if you're going to do an episode on the CGI remake of the Beatles' Yellow Submarine that was never made. I would absolutely love to hear that and your take on it.
Oh, I've never heard of this before. That sounds interesting.
Right. I'll have to look into that. I know that there has been some talk about a Yellow Submarine remake. I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know how much of that is rumor or if it's just Green Rant trying to do more clickbait articles, but
have you ever seen the original Yellow Submarine?
I saw it back in college, and I just remember it just being this weird, like, dreamscape.
I watched it again recently. I first saw it a couple years ago, but I watched it recently with friend of the podcast, Charlie Marlowe.
I remember the fact about Yellow Submarine when we did our Lord of the Rings episode is that all of the Beatles characters are not voiced by the Beatles.
Yep.
They're voiced by actors. So this email comes from Fire Blast Studios. Hi, this is McKay Hirsch of the Emperor's New Podcast. At some point in the future, I'd love to be a guest and talk about Kingdom of the Sun. All right, so this might solidify it. So the epic musical with 100 subplots that would eventually be reworked into the Emperor's New Groove.
And just for everybody out there, you can't just email us and say, hey, I'd like to be a guest on your podcast.
Yeah.
But we know this person. Micah, who's communicated with us before and is in, Escape from Walt Disney and Channel KRT. Yes, Micah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, having your own podcast makes it very easy for us to vet you.
Yes.
Next, we have an email from Gino Paul. And they say, big fan of the show. Not even sure how I stumbled onto the show, but I've listened to every episode and I appreciate all the research you guys do.
Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah. Suggestion, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Haven't heard you guys talk about the series yet. Recently, I heard about an R-rated Star Trek that was going to be directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if this is a rumor, if it was real. I would love to hear the story and any other weird Star Trek movie that didn't happen. Okay.
I have definitely heard people talk about this. I don't know how much of a story there is behind it, but this could definitely be a really interesting episode. I mean, my favorite subjects whenever we talk about them is like this person with this property that you do not expect these two things to go together. That's why the reason I wanted to make this podcast in the first place was because Beatles plus Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tarantino Star Trek is definitely something I think would be interesting and worth talking about.
Next, we have an email from the Blue Guy 98. He says, I actually have 2 requests for future episodes. There's Tim Burton's version of Batman Forever. I know we've gotten suggestions before about his 3rd Batman movie, and I know that there's a story behind it. We do cover quite a bit about Batman, although it would be interesting to kind of go through like Tim Burton's history and his history through filmmaking. So
I think this is something. Oh, wait, no, just kidding. I was looking at our previous movies that have been suggested, and one of them was Tim Burton's Catwoman.
Ah.
So maybe there's like 2 stories in one type of thing there.
So it might have just been a lot of hopeful thinking from WB or like Tim Burton. But that'll be something that we will have to look into.
Yeah, for sure.
Then John Hughes' other unproduced screenplays, since you guys already talked about Jaws 3, People Zero.
I mean, I know that he was one of those guys who wrote a bunch of movies that, never ended up getting made. So, there might be something in there.
Yeah. So we got more from Matthew Horvath. Says, hello, Daniel and David. I know you're going to start the new season, so here are some ideas of unmade animated films that I know have some good stories behind them, since I feel like there's a lack of them in your podcast so far. The story and plots of the scrapped Pixar sequels from the studios that Disney made that weren't going to be made by Pixar at all. I feel like there were some sequels that we mentioned in our Tin Toy episode, but I can look into that. The scrapped VeggieTales movie, Bob and Larry the Movie, which would be timely since the property is on the edge right now with the creators and other key members of the original show being kicked out of future projects. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of drama behind the scenes of VeggieTales.
Interesting. The team of the original Animaniacs trying to make a full-length theatrical Animaniacs movie, which was referred in an actual episode and how it turned into Wacko's Wish. That'll be interesting because I think we can tie that in with the reboot of the Animaniacs recently.
Sure.
The crossover direct-to-DVD movie between Mattel's former hit toy lines Monster High and Ever After High. It was pretty much storyboarded and the official voice actors of the characters were recorded. That would be good since the reboot of Monster High is coming soon. The original Samurai Jack movie that would have ended the series in the rumored Adventure Time movie. I know I've talked about the Samurai Jack television show not being finished, and Tartakovsky has a history of ending his shows with a movie, or at least trying to incorporate a movie. So even with like Dexter's Lab had it was a made-for-TV movie, but Powerpuff Girls, with how big that actually got a theatrical release. And I remember being a huge fan of Samurai Jack, and I just remember it not ending, and that was because Tartakovsky was asked to do Star Wars.
Yep.
And he was like, well, I'm not going to pass this opportunity, so bye.
Always say yes to Star Wars.
So I have my personal attachments to Samurai Jack, so there might be something there, so I might lean heavily towards that. The Adventure Time movie sounds interesting as well. There's the Tom Hanks tried to make a Gumby movie with the company behind Gumby, but Universal prevented it. That could still be made one day.
Tom Hanks plus Gumby. See, this is my favorite thing. It's like, here's this interesting person with this interesting property.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Finally, I can't remember the name, but there's a scrapped animated movie with Handyman Mouse that was once made in 2D and later renewed slightly in 3D. Also, a two-parter of the various Muppet and Henson movies that were made. It's interesting that they already know that there's so much information that it has to be a two-parter, including the Sesame Street movie where Big Bird becomes president, Muppets in Space, the dinosaur movie, Bear in the Big Blue House movie, and the cheapest Muppet movie ever made. I don't know if we mentioned this before, but I am a huge Muppets fan. I love the Muppets. I love Jim Henson.
Oh, I love Muppets too.
Did you see at Skirball, the Skirball Museum?
Oh, the Muppets like exhibit?
Yeah.
No, I didn't get a chance to see that.
I got to see that exhibit and I was just over the moon. I loved it. I've read through the entire biography of Jim Henson and that whole story. Matt is correct to say that this would be a two-parter because going through the history of Jim Henson and the Muppets, that is an incredible story and definitely brings up a lot of frustrations that Jim Henson was running into and the reason why he sold to Disney. A lot of people are assuming, like when Disney did a grab towards Fox to obtain a lot of their properties, but when it came to absorbing the properties of other stuff like Star Wars or the Muppets, a lot of times it was just trying to find a budget and they just didn't have the money there. But you know who does have that money is Disney. So Jim Henson did make a calculated approach to sell the Muppets and that property to Disney. So I think that's an interesting story to see how that came to be and not just Disney trying to absorb everything. Anyway, he says, hope to find at least one of these ideas is good enough for an episode. Love your podcast. Keep up the good work. There's a few other postscripts here. Additionally, info for one of the topics. The mouse one was called Miracle Mouse, Cranky's Miracle, which might be an even crazier story than I thought. It seems to mainly involved a house building business, and there's a link to that here. And then there's another link Says he got another link showing the history of the man behind the project, a Christian house building business owner.
Huh.
All right.
That sounds like Neil Breen.
Yeah, it sounds just like Neil Breen. Next, we have an email from Patrick Nicklaw. He says, "Hey guys, just wanted to write and congratulate for another fantastic season. That Jaws 3 People Zero script was especially wild." It was, definitely was. One quick thing I wanted to say about the Silent Hills video. The lack of fog in the HD games wasn't to be better headwear, but due to Konami losing most of the game's original source code. Put simply, the team basically had to rebuild large sections of the game while also trying to meet a strict deadline.
It's always strict deadlines that are the bane of any creative project.
I also have a few quick suggestions, although I don't know if there's enough info to do a full episode on. First one is this supposed sequel to Treasure Planet, as well as an animated series that was scrapped after the first movie's disappointing box office.
Ooh, I mean, I love Treasure Planet. So.
I know. I've seen your poster.
Oh, yeah. If I could just tell a quick story.
Mm-hmm.
Ron and Don. No, Ron and John. Ron Clements, John Musker. Anyways, a retrospective of all their movies at the El Capitan. Lex and I went for Treasure Planet because that was like one of my childhood favorites. I've got a lot of nostalgia for that movie. And they did a little raffle, and we got the grand prize, which is this enormous poster board of the movie signed by the directors, which has been hanging proudly in our apartment ever since. But I didn't know that there was a planned sequel. I know the story behind even how Treasure Planet got made is kind of interesting.
Yeah, because the original one, it was just this uphill battle of trying to make this movie. Well, I don't know the full story about it, but eventually Disney caved and was like, okay, we'll let you do it.
The short answer is these two guys really wanted to make a movie about Treasure Island in space, and along the way made hit after hit after hit of like the biggest Disney movies of the 90s, and then finally got their passion project made, and it was a massive flop.
Just the story behind Treasure Planet alone, I think, is really interesting. Hopefully there's a story behind the sequel and whether or not that would have happened, or if it was just, again, I just don't want to keep falling into these clickbait articles of like the director saying, I'd do a sequel if they'll allow me to. Yeah. So we'll see. Next, there was a planned Aliens animated series, yes, that one, titled Operation Aliens. It got far enough in development that it spawned a U-line. I actually still have one or two. It spawned a U-line. I don't know what a U-line is. Anyway. Finally, the infamous Toonmakers Sailor Moon American series. Oh. This would have been a live-action animated hybrid series. This one might be a little harder to find info on.
I've never heard of this before, but that does sound like the kind of story that we would talk about on this podcast. A live-action American version of Sailor Moon?
It doesn't surprise me that we would try to do a live-action Sailor Moon.
Although I know Sailor Moon is one of those properties I know nothing about, but I know it's got its massive fans.
Yeah. And then next we have an email from Jonathan LeBrock. It says, Dear, how did this not get made? Once again, you guys have been killing it with your newest season, and I can't wait to hear more. Once again, I'd like to make some suggestions. Circle 7's canceled Pixar sequels, Monsters, Inc. 2, Lost in Scaradise, Finding Nemo 2, aka Finding Marlin. I was wondering how that was going to work because, like, did you lose Nemo again? Finding Marlin, that makes sense. Which I guess did kind of turn into Finding Dory, but that could be looked into.
Well, I also wonder how much of Monsters University came from Monsters, Inc. too.
Yeah. And the Buzz Gets Recalled version of Toy Story 3.
Okay.
Yeah, the Lost in Scaradise. I don't know if you've seen the TV series that follows the events of Monsters, Inc.
No, I haven't.
Because the company makes the change from scaring to laughter. Mm-hmm. And instead of them just ending it that way, you kind of go through a character who has been a fan of these monster scarers his whole life, wants to be a scarer his whole life, and then finally gets a chance to work at Monsters, Inc. and realizes that they've changed everything. And he realizes all the stuff that he's been learning about being a good scarer and now he has to be a funny person is a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
So I do highly recommend watching the animated series that spawned from Monsters, Inc.
I know a little bit about it because I have a friend who was working on the production of that show early on. It was supposed to be one of the flagship Disney Plus series, like launch day, first episode type thing. But Disney was just not happy with some of the directions of the production. One of the big things is that Kelly Marie Tran was one of the main characters, and then she was replaced. They actually even replaced a whole bunch of the creative team. I have a friend who worked on the first version of that show and then wasn't on the show anymore when they started changing up some of the stuff. I don't know too much more than that.
Yeah.
That's one of those shows that I've heard behind the scenes on just because I have a friend who worked on it.
Yeah. I don't mind going and diving back into Pixar because I remember going through the history of Pixar and remembering how amazing that story was.
Yeah.
And I know we've gotten another request before of the unmade Pixar sequels.
Yeah.
We also have Terry Gilliam's Watchmen.
Terry Gilliam doing Watchmen? That's really interesting.
Terry Gilliam, what else has he done?
Brazil and Monty Python.
Oh.
Another famous unmade movie, Lost in La Mancha.
Yeah.
He's a director who has a wild career. 12 Monkeys.
Oh. So for him to do Watchmen, it doesn't seem like it would line up.
I don't know, because if it's something in the Brazil and 12 Monkeys era, he definitely has a really interesting view of absurd dystopia. If he was to do Watchmen, he would make it more comedic, but it would be just as dark. Him writing and filming for the comedian would be perfect.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of Terry Gilliam's movies. I don't know what the story is behind that, but that's super interesting to me. That's another person plus property.
Yeah. All right. I'll have to look into that. Hopefully there's a story behind it. There's Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon.
Okay.
I think I've heard of before that he was going to do Napoleon.
I've definitely heard talk of that before.
There's Freddy versus Jason versus Ash, or the early version of Freddy versus Jason.
Oh, I didn't know Ash was supposed to be in it.
Yeah, that might be interesting to look into, especially if we do another horror movie.
Yeah.
The Adventures of Thomas, a Thomas the Tank Engine movie during World War II. I feel like that's not real.
Certainly doesn't sound real. Who knows,
I stumbled upon a fandom page on it. I'm not going to read it all right now, but apparently the idea was out there. Released for late 2010, and it got canceled in 2014. Weta Studios was behind it. Wow. What was this? Oh, and there's some 3D renders of Thomas. That's crazy. I don't understand how that works. All right. I like that. Next, we have an email from James Morgan. He says, "Hi, Daniel and David. First of all, thank you so much for the episode on Red Dwarf the movie. It really made my day when I listened to it. Yay."
Awesome. I gotta say real quick, I'm very glad that we've now had 2 positive comments about that episode specifically, because I don't know how you felt about it, Dan, but I certainly was like, oh man, I feel like I should not be the one talking about this. I have no connection to Red Dwarf.
It felt like we were on the outside looking in.
Yes.
And just kind of observing, scoping over everything that goes on. But yeah, I'm so glad that everyone loved it.
Glad people got a lot out of it.
As for my request, I'd like to request a potential episode on Treasure Planet 2.
Ooh, okay. Now that that's been named twice, we got to bold that.
Yeah. A sequel Disney canceled so far in development that Willem Dafoe was driving to the studio to record his lines when they officially pulled the plug.
Whoa, okay. This has got to be an episode now.
Willem Dafoe was not part of the first one, correct?
Oh, he was not.
Okay. So my guess is that potentially he could have been like a villain.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm looking it up right now. There's concept art and stuff. Okay.
I do love me my concept art. It makes posting to Instagram and Twitter so much easier.
Yeah. I am down for this. I have no idea what the actual story is, but I remember when we watched it at the El Capitan, I remember afterwards thinking like, oh man, it would be amazing if they just did a sequel to this movie that was like, you've seen Treasure Planet, right?
Yeah, I have.
The end of the movie, they have like the whole montage of Long John Silver's going off to be a pirate again, and Jim Hawkins becomes a member of like the Royal Navy. And I was like, oh man, what if Treasure Planet 2, 10 years from now, Jim Hawkins is tasked with going and capturing the notorious pirate Long John Silver. And now, as a lawman, he's got to go and find his old mentor. I have no idea if that's what the plot actually would have been, but that's what I was thinking about in the last time I watched it.
I'm trying to see if there was a script. Treasure Planet 2. I mean, if it was Disney, trying to find a leaked Disney script is really hard to do. Although we did find the Star Wars script. Yeah, there's a lot of concept art for this. Okay, that's definitely one we'll do. Next, we have an email from Rick Hoshinji. Hello. Love listening to your entertaining and insightful podcasts. I've always hoped for a sequel to This Is the End after years of hearing the Freaks and Geeks alums discuss a few possible ideas, each on more hilariously bizarre than the next. I'm just not sure if there's enough research material for you guys to make a full podcast episode. I've heard about the This Is the End sequel before. I think there's just been talks about it.
I've never heard about this before.
This might be just people saying, like, if we did a sequel, we could do this. Definitely something that I can look into.
Yeah, for sure.
We have another email from GamerGabe18. Hello there, Daniel and David. My name is Gabriel, and I've been a longtime listener, first-time writer. I love your show and how detailed you guys can get. Though you're not immune to mistakes, like with how in the PT episode, if I recall, David said Sonic is owned by Nintendo and that he got into Smash Bros. Before Snake.
I thought that Nintendo bought Sega, but I could be wrong.
Anyway, you guys put a lot of effort into recreating scripts when you can, especially the sound effects. Your script readings have a very cinematic feeling. I love to see you guys cover the unmade Godzilla movies. There's a ton of films to pick from, like Bride of Godzilla, Continuation, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Frankenstein vs. Godzilla, Batman meets Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Hedorah 2, the 1991 Godzilla vs. King Kong, a Space Godzilla, which was adapted into an illustrated story in Starlog magazine, Godzilla 2, which was a sequel to the 1998 Godzilla, and Godzilla vs. Ghost Godzilla, just to name a few. Wow. This kind of feels like when we went through all of RoboCop and not realizing how much was actually in there. So I think Godzilla might be something that we have to cover.
By the way, I just looked it up. Nintendo does indeed not own Sega. They've just had a really great working relationship with Sega for a while. So basically, since Sega stopped making their own consoles and stopped being a competitor.
Yeah, I thought that they were owned by Nintendo, but it makes sense. I know that after the Dreamcast, that's when Sega decided to make the transition from being a console-focused company to a purely game design company.
Yeah. Thank you for that correction. Whenever we do episodes, one of us, usually Dan, is the one who's doing the bulk of the research, and then any comments I make are usually like things I know off the cuff, and sometimes I get those wrong, and I appreciate being corrected.
Yeah. We want to get this all right. Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And then additionally, if you want to do video game ideas, you could cover Star Wars 1313.
Yep, that's one of them that I've been talking about.
Chrono Break, the third Chrono Trigger game.
Oh.
Sonic Extreme, speaking of Sonic, the Sega Saturn Sonic game. And I have a personal connection with Sonic because as a kid I had a Sega Genesis, so I'm leaning more towards that. There's Thrill Kill and the Project Rap Rabbit.
Okay.
Next, we have an email from SmashJoe247, or Joey Montgomery. Hey, Daniel and David. I hope everything is going well for you both. I know I've already tweeted a recommendation of this, but just in case you forgot, I recommended that your podcast discuss about the original story for the Studio Ghibli film Princess Mononoke. Miyazaki's original version that would eventually become the iconic fantasy epic is actually detailed in his book, Princess Mononoke, the first story. And although I have not read the book, I thought it would be interesting to hear you both discuss the history and legend of a Studio Ghibli classic.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Princess Mononoke?
Yes, I have.
When HBO Max first hit, because I'd seen a handful of Ghibli films. I'd seen Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro. That was the first one that I saw of his that it was like, oh, this is dark. This is for adults. The freaking bleeding boars was just terrifying. And I was like, this is not what I was expecting.
Yeah. I mean, this would be really interesting to go into because there's always this American idea, and I know that we're kind of starting to lean away from it, but anything that's animated is for children, whereas
for sure
in Japan, animation is there as this is just another way to tell a story, and it doesn't necessarily have to be for children.
Yeah.
It can be another way of doing so. So I think it would be really interesting to see Miyazaki's background and story and how he approaches filmmaking and animation. He also says, not to mention, I thought it'd be really exciting to hear you both share your connections to Studio Ghibli in general.
Yeah.
Which I guess we kind of did, but yeah. And then we have another email from Canceled Movie Report. It says, hey boys, I have a question here for your season 3 email episode. I saw you can send voice clips, so hopefully this is okay.
Ooh.
Hey lads, it's Cambo here from Canceled Movie Report. Well done on the season. Love the show. I was curious though, has there ever been a canceled movie project that you've wanted to cover, but you just can't seem to find enough information on? For me personally, that is Neil Blomkamp's Alien project. I know there's little bits of concept art or whatever out there, but I've yet to be able to find a whole nugget of information that is worthy of making an episode for. So my hope is that one day, the script leaks online and we can make a substantial something out of it. Anyway, I'm curious whether you've got a project similar to this that you really want to do an episode on, but you just can't find the info you need. Keep up the good work. Can't wait for the next season. Cheers.
What a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing is coming to mind for me right now. Dan, is there anything you can think of, especially ideas we've had for this that you just couldn't find anything about?
So there was one that actually did get fulfilled and still also has more questions about it once I started digging more into it. And that was when we did cover the George Romero musical, The Diamond Dead.
Okay.
And that was because I wanted it to be a part of this second season. It was so hard to find just any information about this movie. It just wasn't out there because every article that I was reading was they were thinking about doing this and then they didn't. And that was really it. It wasn't until I went into the Wayback Machine and looked at the old website for it and found the script for it as well that I realized that there is so much more into it. And after digging around, after throwing it away for season 2, I'm so happy to actually bring it back for season 3 and have an actual story, an actual information for it. So that was one that just it always lingered in the back of my head to be there needed to be more information. And luckily I did hunker down and actually did find that information and actually was able to go out there and actually got that interview with Andrew Lloyd Bachman to find out more about this. And eventually, hopefully, maybe we can actually get the screenwriter to talk about it maybe in the future.
Yeah. I guess I could say, even though we did make an episode of it as well, but I am a little disappointed in how little information there truly was about the Beatles Lord of the Rings story. To the point where when we did an episode, it had to be about a couple of Lord of the Rings projects. Because, again, just the idea of Beatles plus Lord of the Rings just fills the mind with imagination and possibility. If we had a 9-hour documentary about it, it still would feel like there's not enough info about it.
Yeah.
I do feel like there's stuff that's I wish we could have seen the screenplay of.
Yeah, there's a lot of which where I couldn't find the screenplays. So something like A Few Good Ghosts, American Dog were two that I really wish I had the screenplay for. Even Garfield's Judgment Day, even though I have the book that he eventually turned it into, I really wish I could have gotten my hands on that screenplay.
Yeah. This is one of those questions that I can't think of a good answer for in the moment, but now I'm going to be thinking about like every second for the next week, and then something will come to mind and be like, I want to talk about a topiary. That's a movie I put out as a possibility for season 1, and then news came out about the director being not a great person, and I did not want to spend an episode talking about him. I can't even remember his name now, but...
I had my bits about the Samurai Jack movie as well. I know a lot of the surface level stuff of it, but just kind of knowing more info about it, I think I want to look into, although I'm kind of afraid that there's really not much there other than he was gonna do season 4, and maybe there was a plan for season 4 or the movie to wrap things up, and he just said, goodbye, I'm doing Star Wars. I don't want to miss this opportunity. So I know like the surface level stuff, but I don't know too much info about it, but that's just something where I just haven't looked into it as much to know more about it, but I definitely want to know more of it.
It's very easy for us to make an episode out of a little bit of information, because you can always just go into like information about the IP or information about the filmmaker or something. And so like if it's an interesting enough idea, even if there's not a lot of a story to it, we could still make an episode out of it. So I realized like I don't really know if there is anything that there's not enough for us to make an episode out of, because by golly, we'll find a way.
We'll always find a way. I think the most disappointing ones, and I kind of wish I don't know how to do this, but I guess Canceled Movie Report kind of covered it. But the script for Halo, for some reason, I could not find it anywhere. And it was actually, I forget who the podcast was, but they actually contacted me and they were like, hey, do you want the script for Halo? And I was like,
yes,
sure. Yeah, I'll take it. And I have that, so I can read through it whenever I want to.
Oh.
But I don't know what to do with that now. The episode's already out.
Sounds like a Canceled Movie Report special.
I mean, it already is. They've already done it? Yeah, they've already done Halo because they they found the script.
Okay.
That I did. So I think it's not necessarily research where that it's lacking. The only other times where I feel like there's not enough information is usually when I cannot find the script. And I would love to find the script.
Or it's something where it was like a clickbaity thing where it was like somebody asked Tim Burton in an interview, hey, do you want to make Nightmare Before Christmas 2? And he says, sure. And then people are like, ooh, this is a real thing. And it's like, no, it's not.
I don't know if you have been keeping up with the Miller and...
Oh, Lord and Miller. Yeah, there was just a thing that came out about their solo project, right?
No. So they have been talking about the 21 Jump Street Men in Black crossover.
Oh, they must have done a big interview because I saw a couple of quotes from them about Solo. So I bet you there was like a big spread that they're talking about a bunch of projects.
Yeah, someone had gotten a Patreon interview with them, and some of that interview has been starting to leak out.
Oh,
but they have basically been spilling all of their projects and what they were not able to accomplish. But they were talking about 21 Jump Street, and one of the aspects of the 21 Jump Street Men in Black crossover was that, I mean, we were kind of close in thinking that it was going to be the two officers from 21 Jump Street going into a high school, realizing that they're accidentally discovering an alien conspiracy. And because of that, they then have to join the Men in Black. Now, Lord and Miller, they revealed that within the script, which I hear is really funny. But within the script, the color of the suits are kind of like rankings in martial arts. So the black suit is essentially a black belt.
So they're like going to be like the Men in Blue or something like that?
Yeah, so they gave them powder blue suits instead.
That's great.
So maybe that's another one where, yes, we did create an episode about it, and there was a lot of information. And granted, like you were saying before, there was so much IP history within that, I mean, both 21 Jump Street and Men in Black, that there was enough to cover an episode. But as far as like the actual movie goes, it seemed to be lacking in a lot of that. And hopefully more gets revealed, and maybe we'll get a script leak. I'm not going to say this is for sure, but having a possible amendment episode where we kind of like revisit, find out more information. Maybe we'll actually go through the Halo script if we feel that's necessary. But if that 21 Jump Street Men in Black script does come out, I think that would be definitely worth it to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We have another email from Michael Nally. It says, "Hey guys, you're doing awesome stuff and wondering if I could submit a couple requests. One, the Wesley Snipes Black Panther film."
Whoa, what? Now wait, is this Black Panther the superhero, or is this about the Black Panthers?
Oh, I mean, it could...
No, efforts to make a Marvel Black Panther movie. Okay.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Kind of makes sense with Wesley Snipes being in Blade, and he's why don't we keep this comic book energy going?
Yeah.
There's the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4. I keep hearing about this, that they were going to continue on with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. There's also talks about Mark Webb's third Spider-Man movie or Amazing Spider-Man movie.
Which now people want to have happen. There's a lot of renewed energy to try to make that happen.
Which I love the commenters saying after that and be like, you know what? If you wanted this movie back then, you should have showed more love to the second Spider-Man movie.
Well, I think what people realize is that they like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. They may not necessarily like Mark Webb's Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's true. Number 3, the planned Captain America TV series.
Okay.
And the 4th planned Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film after Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. That's not the Michael Bay ones.
No, that would be the, original animatronic ones, right? I assume that's what it's talking about.
That's what I'm thinking of too, which I think would be an interesting story because there's this weird mockumentary about the Turtles going on a music tour, like a rock music tour, and they treat them as if they're like a real band, and it's weird. And you get to see them in concert, which is like a packed stadium full of people to watch what essentially is like the equivalent of the Chuck E. Cheese band, but like having a huge audience for it, except for the animatronics. There's actually people in costume just kind of like faux playing all of their instruments. It's bizarre. We have another email from Ariel Armenta. She says, "Hey guys, love the show. I have a quick question that I think would be neat for you to answer on air. What's the most mind-blowing or shocking fact you've learned while researching for the show?"
Another great question.
Maybe because it's just fresh in my mind, but the Wonder Woman episode and just knowing that the creator of Wonder Woman, Marston, I knew that there was a connection between him and Planned Parenthood. I was not aware that he invented the polygraph machine.
Yeah.
And that he was just asked by DC to come in to be a consultant. And then he eventually said, like, I want to create a hero as well, to then make one of the most iconic superheroes of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, just knowing Marston's history alone was mind-blowing.
I think one of my favorite things we uncovered on the show was not something that was actually done in the research, but a realization that we made. Well, I guess it was in the research kind of, but a realization that we made partway through was the connection to Laika that A Few Good Ghosts had. That was a really great moment where I was like, wow, this really looks like Laika Creations. And then sure enough, he went on to do a lot of work in the early days of Laika.
Yeah.
That, and I think in one of the episodes that I did research on, I think one of my favorite things I uncovered was this story about how Colin Trevorrow got hired for Jurassic World and how that came about because Brad Bird was not doing Star Wars. I thought that was a really funny story.
Yeah. Another one I think was the origin story of Spider-Man. Just because there's this story that Stan Lee is the ideas guy at Marvel. Mm-hmm. And we attribute so much to what he's done. And given, like, he has done a lot. He has accomplished so much. And it's the reason why Marvel is successful today.
Sure.
But just knowing the actual history of Spider-Man and how the origin came to be, it's like when you find out that Bill Finger had so much more to do with Batman than Bob Gale ever did.
Yeah.
And knowing that there's so much behind, instead of Stan Lee looking up at a wall, which I do not believe this story whatsoever, with Stan Lee looking at the wall, trying to think of a new superhero, and was like, oh, there's a fly like crawling up the wall. What if we had like a superhero that could crawl up the wall like a fly, but Flyman won't do. I know a Spider-Man. I do not believe that story at all. And I remember we covered the actual origins of Spider-Man in our Spider-Man episode. Also, Japanese Spider-Man is wild. Oh, yes. I love Japanese Spider-Man. There was a lot that came out of that. I mean, there's so much that comes out of this research that it's either we realize something, we make a connection, or just heard of stories that are just completely unbelievable, like a con man trying to get the creator of Red Dwarf to send him money.
I was just about to bring that up as another one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. That was great. One more story that I just thought was so ridiculous was how they had people in Spartan armor for the Halo movie delivering the scripts, and that whole like,
oh my god, I forgot about that
PR stunt that they were doing is also just like ridiculous.
The ambition, the audacity to be like, this movie is going to be the hottest movie that everyone's going to be clamoring for, and then all the studios read it and was like, I don't know.
Did that Halo show just come out?
The previews for it have been coming out, but that is going to be on Paramount Plus.
All right.
We have another email from Shane Myers. It says, hello, I'm a huge fan of the show. I was wondering if you would do an episode on Guillermo del Toro's Haunted Mansion movie.
Yes. This is something that's been on our list for a while. We got to make it happen.
I think the problem is that we kind of have to limit our Guillermo del Toro exposure because there's going to be so much of him if we just accept it.
Yep.
But I think this is the season where we finally do it.
Yeah, for sure.
We have even more from Matthew Horvath. I think this is our 6th, 7th email from him. Says, hey guys, even more suggestions. Well, here we go. The potential codename Kids Next Door continuation their creator planned for called Galactic KND. The continuation of the WB comic Mucha Lucha Para Siempre, along with the lost stories from the original show from a scrapped 4th season, a feature movie, and other luchador-based shows that never get off the ground by the creators. You can find it all at Eddie Mort's big exclusive Tumblr. The original premise of the 3rd SpongeBob SquarePants movie, I think we've talked about. Wait, I think there was like
I think there's something about SpongeBob on our list.
Yeah, it was like this weird offshoot. It was like an unapproved SpongeBob spoof movie.
Yeah.
SpongeBob might be interesting to go into because I know it is a 90s Nicktoon that is still around to this day.
Yeah.
Technically, because it came out in 1999. The 3rd SpongeBob SquarePants movie included a space cat invasion. That's all I'm going to say for now. He sent us a link to this Twitter account. It's Nintendo. This cartoon reviewer did a whole video on the subject. Contacting him might be a good start. All right. There's the Lego movie that Jorge R. Gutierrez was set to direct, The Brick Race. The 3rd season of the stop-motion cartoon Bump in the Night that was just starting and was canned by the Disney/ABC merger. I didn't realize that Disney and ABC had a merger. I just assumed that ABC was just a channel that was owned by Disney. I didn't realize it was a merger. While not exactly sure, I bet there might be some unmade things in the Pokemon world. I mean, we can try. A show that was close to being made on Disney XD, HOOD, or Hood, but just had a pitch short, and no one knows what happened. The unmade season 3 of Craig McCracken's Disney show Wander Over Yonder that seemed really nuts. I know we covered Wander Over Yonder on the Weird Alphabet.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Weird Al was a voice on it. 2 different suggestions from Lauren Faust. 1, her failed toy line /cartoon she pitched to Hasbro, Milky Way and the Galaxy Girls. the canceled feature she was making based on Medusa, the various scrapped movies from the Jim Henson Company to continue the Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal was an interesting story because I know that was like a passion project.
Yeah.
I know it eventually became a cult classic, but it failed. Like, it was a bomb. No one really understood it because it wasn't the Muppets. It wasn't anything that anyone was ever really familiar with, and it was just so weird and bizarre. Finally, the Fraggle Rock back in the spotlight with the reboot coming soon. It'd be good to talk about the other time they tried to reboot, a movie that went through lots of rewrites before being stopped. And this is kind of in the biography that Jim Henson a lot of times was just struggling to find people to finance his movies. Again, this is why he decided to sell the company to Disney. And the idea was that if Disney owned it, it would be easier for his movies to get financed because he was still going to work for the Jim Henson Company just under Disney. But there was so many times that he was trying to find financing for it. And even Frank Oz, he has this interesting, I'm paraphrasing what he said here, but he was so frustrated with all of these production meetings. He was quoted saying in the book something along the lines of, it seems like whenever we have these production meetings, the one person who needs to make the decision is never here. And I hate going to these production meetings. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's under Jim Henson that didn't get made or like was an idea that he was trying to push off.
Yeah.
And then next we have a email from my friend Johnny. He has been sending us emails from season 1. You may remember him before because he was the one that gave me all the dinosaur names that I could not pronounce at all.
Dinosaur Johnny?
Mm-hmm. But it looks like he has given me a new challenge here, and you'll see what that challenge is.
A new set of things to mispronounce?
Not really. But it is a new challenge, and you'll see what I mean. So he says, hello. Thanks so much for another awesome season. I really enjoyed it. First off, I wanted to thank you for ruining the perfectly good drinking game I created for you last season by addressing everything that was in the game. It's probably for the best, though, because I'm usually driving while I listen.
Don't listen to podcasts and drive, folks.
No, never. For better or for worse, I told Dan I'd write him a rap for the season's email. The problem is I can't rap, let alone write one. But at this point, it seems more Dan's problem than mine. So
he actually wrote it out for you.
He actually wrote it out. Let me see what I can do. Okay. My name is Daniel Kaka. This rap is kind of awkward. I eat cheese and climb fake rocks, yeah. I host a podcast about movies. I think it's kind of groovy. This weird guy wrote a rap for me, and it's if he thinks he knew me. I like graphic t-shirts. I have so many it hurts. I wish I got them larger so I could eat some more desserts. I like Jurassic Park and also Tony Stark. Please don't tell anyone, and I'm still scared of the dark. Wickety wickety wah. I can't freestyle. Oh, no.
We need to get Michael to like make a beat for this.
Ooh, I have no idea if I was on any sort of tempo at all. Oof. Well, he ends it with, well, thanks for suffering through another one of my emails, and thanks again for another series. Maybe this coming season, you can look up Wake Up Ron Burgundy. Make sure if it's just a second movie made out of Anchorman or the original. I remember seeing it when I was younger and not understanding why it existed, and the Wikipedia article isn't very helpful either. So, do you know anything about Wake Up Ron Burgundy?
No, I don't.
So, for my surface understanding of it is that they took all the raw footage for Anchorman and they re-edited it into a completely different movie called Wake Up Ron Burgundy.
All right. Huh. That's very cool.
Yeah. And then the next one, looks like I have a lot of family members who are writing into my podcast because I had my dad send me an email. He mentioned that the podcast is a great way to learn what I'm up to in Los Angeles. And this is from both my mom and my dad.
My mom is a Patreon subscriber for that reason, just so she can listen to our unclogs and catch up with me that way.
Amazing. But the reason why I wanted to include this, am I able to share my screen? The reason why is because he wrote, attached is a picture of the Batman Returns VHS tape that you spoke about. It seems to be still holding together.
Hey.
There it is.
Nice.
My Batman Returns VHS.
Nice.
It's still in decent condition.
Yeah. Man, what would have been the VHS that I played the most as a kid? Probably Toy Story.
Man, I love that movie. I really did. I mean, it was like a wish come true when I worked at Warner Brothers because there were so many things that were there that were like, they were in the movie.
Yeah.
And I remember being in the prop house, and I don't know if you remember the scene where all the minions for the Penguin comes out.
Okay.
And there's like a bunch of these clowns, but there's these people who are on motorcycles, and they're wearing like these big skull like helmet things. They're not really helmets, but like it looks like they put a big skull on there, and in front they have like googly eyes on there. And it was featured in the prop house at Warner Brothers, and when I saw it, I immediately recognized what it was.
Yeah, I've only seen Batman Returns once, so I definitely would not recognize that right away.
Our final email from Mikey Tabletop says, "Hey, How Did This Not Get Made podcast. I absolutely love your show. I think it's incredibly interesting and always really well researched. You guys are my favorite movie podcast out there." Ooh,
Wow.
that's a big statement right there.
Yeah, there's a lot of movie podcasts out there.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that this is my favorite movie podcast. I appreciate that highly.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Having said that, I also think it's really cool that you had a non-movie episode this season. I listened to your PT episode driving a truck through a heavy fog at 3 a.m, and it really added to the ambience.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think it might be one of my favorite episodes, actually. Yay.
That's awesome.
I'm so happy to introduce video games and doing PT, because I feel like it's this untapped potential that we can go into that still has so many great stories in it. I know a lot of your episodes are on canceled comic book movies. So I thought it'd be interesting to do a canceled comic book. Alan Moore, who's most known for doing Watchmen, V for Vendetta, and Batman the Killing Joke, pitched the story to DC Comics in 1987.
Oh, wait, so this is a canceled comic book.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was going to be a dark and gritty finale of the DC universe. Oh. Okay, so 87, this is around the time that Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. So I'm wondering if he came in knowing that DC wanted to do a huge reboot, restart to everything. I mean, this is me speculating, but this is my guess.
Yeah.
He wanted to be the last story in the DC continuity. Twilight of the superheroes would have portrayed our typical heroes as dirty or broken and even incestuous, with some of them being murderers and prostitutes, and the marriage of Captain Marvel and his twin sister, Mary Marvel. The story was never published, and Alan Moore refused to work with DC any longer. Not because of this. Moore and DC have a long history of not playing nice together. Yeah. Which kind of makes sense with, wait, when did Watchmen come out? 86, 87. Oh. The Watchmen is one of those few stories that stands out as like superheroes are flawed.
Yeah. And when was he making this pitch? Before or after Watchmen?
This is around the same time, because Watchmen came out in 1986, and he was making this pitch to DC in 87.
Okay, because I have heard a rumor that the characters in Watchmen were originally characters from the Justice League and DC characters, and like he just couldn't get the rights to those characters, so just made his own.
Made it around. It's kind of like with the Eternals. You can kind of see which DC superhero is what, but they just changed it just enough to get around it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That does sound like a really interesting story.
I like that.
I never thought about going into comics on here, but I think that's not something that we have to keep off the table. That's a really cool story.
The original pitch was leaked online, but there was some debate as if it were real or not. Okay. But then in 2020, DC Comics officially published the pitch at the end of an anthology series collecting important comics from the 80s.
Wow.
Twilight of the Superheroes is sometimes referred to as the greatest comic never made because of its status as lost work. Interesting. Anyways, just thought it'd be something right up your alley.
Yeah.
So many comic related movies. Keep up the good work. I really enjoy your show.
What a great suggestion.
Yeah. All right.
All right, that's all of our emails.
Yeah.
I want to go over and just like call out some of my favorites here. I did not catch everything. There were a couple of emails that had 50 suggestions that I just kind of wrote down 2 or 3 that sounded the most interesting immediately because there was a lot. But going through this, the Godzilla sound interesting. I think Mona and Mouse Guard sounds like that could have a really interesting story behind it.
Yeah.
The Beatles, Don Bluth, Strawberry Fields Forever. That sounds super interesting to me. The Hodorowski's Dune, the Emperor's New Groove one, that one feels like we got to. Tarantino's Star Trek, the VeggieTales movie. I don't know how much there is going to be behind that one, but I'm curious, just especially because there's a lot of behind-the-scenes drama, big idea, that production company. Treasure Planet 2, I think, hopefully has something. The Terry Gilliam Watchmen, that was one that I really like. Wesley Snipes Black Panther. That's another one of those things. It sounds like it could have so much possibility. Haunted Mansion and Twilight of the Superheroes.
Yeah.
That's my dark horse of like, I was not expecting this, and that's a super interesting story.
I mean, out of this, I really love the Twilight of the Superheroes. I think that is going to be our exception to move out of movies and TV shows.
It's just going to become media in general. How did this piece of media not get made? Which, that's fine.
Yeah. All of the Godzillas.
Yeah.
Just that whole franchise in general. It seems like they're just kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what's stuck. So I think that's really interesting to go into. Thomas the Tank Engine during World War II. Even if there's not much of a story behind there, I want to know more.
Who was it that was making that again? You were saying What a Workshop was working on the animation.
Yes, What a Workshop from Halo and doing Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
The Treasure Planet 2, just the whole story of Treasure Planet. I know it intrigues me right from the beginning, but knowing that there might have been a sequel just kind of gives us an excuse to actually dive down that whole story.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for all these wonderful suggestions. Thank you for being such big fans of this podcast. That means a lot, hearing everybody's enthusiasm for our podcast. The other day, Dan made a chart of the first day downloads of every podcast episode. How many downloads do we get on the first day? And seeing that steady growth of every episode, well, almost every episode gets more downloads than the previous. There's one spike in there from the Devil's Jesters.
It's our most popular and maybe most controversial episode, but everyone seems to love it.
Yeah.
So, and it even spawned off, I saw on Twitter that someone actually did a video essay about critics and just the toxic nature of online media critics.
Oh, interesting. There's a video essay I saw a while ago about the Nostalgia Critics web series whose name I can't remember now. But anyways, she did this big video essay about it, and now, recently tweeted out that her video essay now has more views than any single episode of the web series that she's critiquing, which is kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we definitely got a lot to work on here, a lot to look at. Yeah. Thank you again, everybody. This is awesome.
Yeah. Thank you for the input, for the emails. Thank you for the support. And I know we don't do this on our show during the regular episodes, but David, if you can bring up all of the Patreon supporters, I just want to list off who those people are because you are all fantastic. Thank you for supporting us, believing in us, believing in what we put out there.
For $5 and up. So thank you, Accordion Mike, Alex Price, Amber Fontaine, Austin Nebbia, Bennett Ballard, Brady Forsberg, Bridget Machida, Cody Crepane, Connor McGinnis, Dan Big Challenges Silva, Dante Hawk, Detective Trogdor, Dom Flores, Elfie the Sentient NPC, Friendly Local Geek, Item Crafting, Jerry Skids, Kentucky Kaiju, Kestrel Magic, Kyle Carosa, Mewtwo Queen, Michael Dunn, Miss Jukebox 8, The Mystery Shack Look Back, Nicholas Villarreal, One and Only Danky, Sarah Gaines, Scott Stoner, Smiley's Beach Party, Spencer Parks, Sterling Axel, Strong Brush, Sunset Appleton, 999, Tyler Harper, and Zeb. So thank you, everybody, so much for your support.
Yeah.
This is for this podcast and Come On Fahuguapods and future projects like that VeggieTales podcast, which we will make.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.